Cable news hosts have earned the ire of progressives this week after their coverage of ongoing reconciliation talks appeared to be less than balanced, with critics accusing legacy media of failing to be transparent in their coverage of corporate Dem holdouts, including Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. Let's take a look at some of that coverage.
And it's so terrible, and have a lot of people playing clips of Janet Yellen on television over and over again about the perils of this risk. But they know how this ends, and so they're doing their own performance. They also know how the infrastructure fight ends, which is that they've never had the math to do what Bernie Sanders wants to do. In the end, Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema will prevail.
I understand the strategy on trying to make sure you figure out how to keep some of these centrists on board with reconciliation. But this does feel like the living example of cutting off your nose to spite your face. Why is tanking that bill tomorrow the right way to get reconciliation done?
So, look, I think the real question is, what part of an agreement have people forgotten? When we were first advancing the bipartisan part one of the two-part infrastructure package, it was clear. It was clear to members of the Senate, in the House, and to the president that we were on a dual track. The first piece, whatever we could negotiate on a bipartisan basis, we would support, but it was with the understanding that in the budget reconciliation package, part two of infrastructure, we would go even bigger and bolder on so many things that are urgently needed across the country.
Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema are the two centrist Democrats the president is trying to cut this deal with. This is Senator Manchin last night. Man, holding one hostage over the other is not fair and not right. It's not good for the country. Everyone is not going to get what they want. Senator Manchin says, pass the infrastructure bill, show the American people Washington can work, let the president sign something that creates lots of jobs, and then we'll go into a room and negotiate. You don't trust him, do you? You don't trust him that you'll get the second piece if you pass the first one solo.
Yeah, in fact, it's just the opposite of what he's saying. One person is holding the rest of us hostage, right? And he needs to say what he's for. And once he does, we can finalize the details on this bill. But, you know, we really kind of need that cooperatively. Maybe if there were a few less cameras over on the Senate side that have more time to actually get the work done that they need to do, and I think that's what we need to get done. But I am confident. No one wants to go back to Arizona or West Virginia and tell your constituents that they don't have a tax cut for 40 million Americans in place for years to come because they couldn't tell you what they were for. No one wants to say that they killed childcare, affordable childcare in their districts because they couldn't come and put together a deal. We're going to get this done. When it happens is, to me, all procedure.
Here to discuss is host of the Katie Halper Show and co-host of the Useful Idiots podcast, Katie Halper. Welcome, Katie.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So it's so strange to see, and those are just a couple of examples that it's been everywhere on cable for the last
we don't have all day
several weeks. It's so strange to see progressives. It's just sounding rational, saying very normal, obvious things, and these cable co-hosts just being unable to comprehend it. What is being lost in translation here?
Well, I don't know if it's lost in translation so much as what happens when you are serving the role of kind of megaphone for corporate Dems, which we see literally in the last clip that we saw, right? John King is just quoting Joe Manchin, taking what he says for granted as kind of in good faith, sincere, not politically motivated, not self-interested, and they're just acting as the spokespeople for these Democrats. So I think it's really cynical. And of course, as Pocan pointed out, why are they the ones, the progressive Democrats, why are they the ones who are portrayed as the hostage holders when, if anything, as Pocan points out, it's Manchin and Sinema who are holding everyone else hostage with their refusal to even give a number in the case of Manchin. And you just see how much the media enables these Democrats. And it's really disturbing. In a way, it's so transparent. They do us a favor, us being people who want to call this out. But I don't think they do the country a favor because they're basically making it easier and providing cover for corporate Democrats to screw over the American people.
And a good example of that, what Katie you're describing, is exactly when John King was putting words in Joe Manchin's mouth, trying to sort of justify and endorse, I guess, tacitly his position when he said, show Washington works. Show that Washington works.
Yeah.
And Washington working, from the perspective of corporate journalists, is often Washington working in favor of the establishment. And something that I tell a lot of people on the right all the time is that media bias is not partisan. It is establishment bias. Do you think that's the dynamic we're seeing play out now?
I mean, I think there's an establishment bias, there's a corporate bias, there's a donor bias, there's a rubbing shoulders with powerful people bias. And I think that it's just a question also of framing the establishment narrative as the narrative. And what's really dangerous, and we see this a lot, is when corporate media figures, and of course politicians, but we kind of expect that more from them. But when you have people in the media pretending that their own ideological commitments are actually just calling strikes and balls, or balls and strikes,
neutral.
They're neutral, and they're just describing as opposed to actually passing judgment. They're pretending that what they're saying has to be the way it is, because it has to be the way it is, not because they want it to be the way that is.
Mm-hmm. And we saw Don Lemon and Chris Cuomo just last night say, "Oh, we never, say something that's not factually true. We just call it as it is." Unlike the other networks, unlike conservative media, it's like I think Katie's right. The biggest problem is this fake pretense of neutrality, that your narrative is the narrative, that this is an apple and this is a banana.
And that might work. Yeah. That might work if they had a reasonable understanding of what the world looks like. But there's a real Rip Van Winkle thing going on with them, where they've woken up into a world that they don't understand, because they do have an establishment bias. But guess what? The Democratic Party establishment is aligned with Bernie Sanders on this question. The Build Back Better thing, that's Joe Biden's cheesy slogan. This is the party establishment of Joe Biden is the one pushing this reconciliation bill. And it's just a couple of corporate hacks like Josh Gottheimer who are getting in the way of it. But that doesn't comport with the understanding that the media has of the way Washington works. The way Washington works, according to them, is that progressives are, at best meaningless, at worst kind of annoying. And
marginalized
they're just kind of disrupt things, but eventually they'll get steamrolled. So, Katie, is it just that they don't know how to reckon with this new world in which the two poles, the progressive wing and the kind of the Tea Party wing, the Freedom Caucus wing, actually have real power in Washington now?
Maybe. I mean, it's always a toss-up. You never exactly know whether it's that they can't do it or they don't want to do it. I don't know how aware they are, if they're like going to sleep nervous about this, realizing the world is changing. I mean, we also should remember that Biden could be doing more, right? I mean, there's stuff that could happen behind the scenes, I'm sure, with Manchin, Sinema, Gottheimer, so that it was not politically viable for them to be so obstructionist. And we should look at that also. Remember that these people are basically like becoming the poster children for bad centrist corporate Democrats. But we do have to look at and wonder why there isn't more backdoor negotiations with Biden, with Schumer, Pelosi, making sure that this does get passed.
It's funny.
I think they're kind of useful villains, rotating villains.
It's funny because it does recall when John McCain called Ted Cruz a wacko bird, I think it was, in the Freedom Caucus, Tea Party years, I guess more the Tea Party years. The media suddenly took the side of establishment Republicans, and suddenly they were pro-establishment Republicans, because they love when people that are anti-establishment, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, are put in their place and sort of depicted as the fringy wacko birds. They love that. Katie, do they love that because it's also sort of drama, the political drama?
Yeah, I mean, they keep talking about this trust issue. Chuck Todd was talking about it. John King was talking about it, like they're acting like marriage counselors or something for the Democrats and trying to help the corporate Dems and progressive Dems build trust and understand each other, as if that's what it's about. And again, as if it's dysfunctional or something for progressive Dems to be skeptical of centrist Dems. And I think that, the nice thing is that it's nice to actually see progressives act like the more equivalent. I mean, they barely are. But, one of the problems is that we don't have a Tea Party on the left. And this is perhaps becoming a little bit like we're seeing for the first time Dems actually even feigning playing hardball, which is something we're not used to seeing. But, it's really amazing how much the corporate media just acts as cheerleaders for the corporate Democrats. And I'm hoping that people are seeing it now. But the very scary thing about media bias is that it's hard to notice, right? Because like no one's going to say, hey, I'm doing this and I'm misrepresenting it. When the people who are doing it are the ones allegedly presenting reality, it's very hard for people watching to get that reality that they're showing isn't the reality out there.
I thought Pocan did a good job in the John.
He did do a really good job. Yeah, Pocan did a good job.
And it's easy to do a good job because they're just making basic points. And like Bernie Sanders yesterday said, look, it's true. We don't trust them. They don't trust us.
Right.
So therefore, we do these two bills together. Like, get out of your feelings and just focus on the objective conditions that exist here. And therefore, if we yoke each other to ourselves, you need us to pass your bipartisan bill, we need you to pass our reconciliation bill. Do it together, and then nobody has to think about their feelings.
Yeah. And what about the feelings of all the people who need childcare and all these things that are in the reconciliation bill? I mean, if we want to talk about people's feelings and privilege people's feelings, let's talk about people's feelings who aren't just like among the most powerful people in the country.
Prayers up for Gottheimer. Katie Halper,
yes, seriously.
Thanks so much for your time this morning.
Thanks.
Katie Halper, host of The Katie Halper Show, co-host of the Useful Idiots podcast. We always appreciate it. We'll have more Rising for you right after this.